And welcome, everyone, to episode 7 of Masks and Mimicry. As usual, it's Vellic and Brand.
Hello.
Today, we're going to talk about how to help develop character story as a storyteller for a tabletop RPG. Though our recent series of episodes have focused on Dungeons & Dragons, this one's going to be more wide-reaching, covering any and all tabletop games, really, or at least ones with character story. I did do, as I usually do, a Twitter pre-poll before this, but I didn't get a very good response rate this time, unfortunately. So I'm going to start with the question, which was, when you are the storyteller, DM, game master, whatever you want to call it for the specific game, how involved are you in helping players build their character story?
Personally, I try to be quite involved. I'm at least always available to discuss things. I know some people like to be more hands-off, and it's like, here's the general information you need to know. Go make a character. I like to sit there and be available, ask questions. I will specifically come up with a list of questions that are general to kind of start getting feedback from them. And then as I get that information, their backstories, elements of it, I'll start asking more specific questions in response to those backstory elements and try to get things from me, and then also to get them to think about it as well.
Yeah, there's it's kind of a weird thing to talk amongst ourselves because, we've played together a lot, and so I think we've certainly adopted certain things from each other. Like you've done certain things, and then I've gone like, oh, I'm going to do that. That sounds like a good idea. So it's I absolutely take a similar approach where I certainly try to help them with questions that'll help me build the game, but also help them develop things, help them come up with ideas and stuff to build out their characters. I try to be somewhat involved, like especially with creating like the character backstory and everything. I don't want to be overly involved, but I do like to give tips, even unsolicited. If someone comes out and they're like, I'm going to do this class and I'm thinking about doing this thing, then I'm like, oh, well, have you thought about this? Or this might be a cool thing to do. You don't have to, but this might be a cool thing. Or this is a way to tie this into this region, especially giving tips that are related to the setting or the type of game that I want to run. Things that might help me incorporate it into the story better.
Yeah, that definitely helps get them involved and being prepared to deal with those things in the setting, because it will come up.
Georgie is saying that currently for a campaign starting Sunday, they're building characters actively in text chat and Discord with the GM and party members, Q&A, as well as adjustment from feedback. Yeah, I think that's you're essentially talking about the session 0, which whether you do it live or asynchronously, to use a fancy word for not live, which is honestly how we often do it. We sometimes do still have like a in-person, well, not in-person, but like a live virtual get together to talk about session 0, but more often it's like, most of it's through like polls or text chat and stuff, and going like, I'm thinking about playing a rogue and this kind of rogue and yada or something, and and I think that's vital to have that kind of back and forth. It is always interesting picking and choosing what you want to tell all the other players, though, because like I like to hold a lot of things back, but I do want to give them enough so that someone's not going to get into the game and be like, oh, well, I wanted to make that kind of character, and you end up making the same thing I did.
For at least like mechanically, it's generally a good idea to share a little bit of maybe race, class, idea wise, keeping the story elements to yourself, because that's part of the group experience of the storytelling, not just from the storyteller or the GM, but the whole group sharing something and reacting to it.
Well, it's definitely. I don't think I've ever had a ton of success, or as much success as perhaps I would like with a group completely coming together in session zero and going, everyone like coming up and going, yes, we want to do this, and agreeing with something, with a general
No.
concept, and giving feedback, going, yeah, let's do that, and that, and that. And that. I've rarely, some people have talked about that, and they're like, that's great. And I'm like, that would be great. I've never seen that happen. Not quite. I mean, people coming to an agreement and going like, yeah, that sounds interesting, let's do that. But never like completely in sync in that way. But it's
case in point, my campaign, this is the first time I did it. I gave you guys a list of like 15 something types of group cohesion elements, and you all voted on your top 3. And there was a huge disparity between what people wanted. It got narrowed down, but there was still at the end of it, like, okay, someone's going to be doing something they didn't vote for. Is that okay? And they'd give, oh yeah, I'll do that, but only if this happens. Like if we do it this way, I'll be okay with it.
Yeah, and then we ended up doing like one of the most standard kind of things ever. Like, we're gonna be an adventurers guild. Okay. Yeah, that was interesting because some people wanted to do some other things, and things that I would sometimes be up for. Is just I was like, for this particular thing, like I wanted to do this and not necessarily do that, and so yeah. Cooperative storytelling will never have 100% group I mean, it's true. Any kind of cooperative effort never has 100% cohesion. You always have to persuade someone of something a little bit. Sarah still wants to do pirates. That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, some people wanted to do pirates, and I was like, I don't want to do pirates. Like, I would love to do a pirate game someday, but in this particular game right now, I don't want to do a pirate.
Yeah, that was voted on by like a few people, so I ended up going back and it's like, you guys aren't pirates, but there will be pirates in the game very early on, and kind of throw that in to give you a little bit of it.
And one of the players ended up getting a ship anyway, and
right?
we ride around on the ship a lot. So I mean,
you're kind of there.
Kind of worked out. So speaking of storyteller involvement in the process of helping to develop character story. Especially like initially, early on. Mm-hmm. Is there any such thing as being too involved? What is too involved with that process?
Oh, I do think there is a limit. Yes. Especially if you're making a campaign that is designed to allow kind of the freedom of character development. Typically, I guess longer campaigns suit that better. You want to make sure you're giving them the opportunity to create their thing without feeling like you're just trying to railroad them to follow a story.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think that if you're suggesting, I think it's fine for the storyteller to suggest things that they think would be interesting. At least I hope it is, because I do it all the time.
I think it is.
When people are working on stuff and I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. This might be interesting, but I always hope that it comes off as like very much an idea and not as an obligation. Like, you have to do it this way, because I never intended that way. And it's always a concern of mine is that someone's going to take something I say like that and then be like, oh, well, the DM really wants me to do this. I'm like, no. I'm just thinking that might be cool if you also think that would be cool. As a way to take it. And I definitely think that you always want to hold despite saying that, I think the majority of the ideas needs to come from the player. You might respond. I might respond with a suggestion that changes something that they're suggesting. Like if someone says, I was thinking about doing this, then I might go, oh, that would be interesting, especially maybe if you do this or if you do it this way. Maybe that's a thing. And I did that for in my current game. I don't want to go too much into it because it's character backstory stuff, and there's some of the people in the game in here. But
yes.
For one of our characters, they were like, I want to be I'm thinking about making a Warforged druid, and I was thinking that this is how they came about in this particular fashion, and they kind of look like this because of this, and yada yada yada. And then I tweaked that, and I was like, well, how about what if instead of it being because of this, this is what happened. And I just kind of suggested an alternative for how something happened in a way that I thought made more sense for the setting and everything and the game world. Still wasn't, it's still not a requirement, just kind of putting that out there as going like, I think this might fit better.
Yeah. And that's a fair way to kind of guide it a little bit if you need to, or if you think it will fit better. Just because sometimes if you leave things too much in the player's hands, they might come up with something really cool, but you then struggle being like, well, how do I even bring this into what's happening?
We have famously had a player in our games who sometimes likes to push the limit with their requests for character stuff. Can I have a character that does this and has this? And we're like, oh, no. Yeah. I try not to say no. I've made it my personal philosophy of the last couple years to say yes as much as possible. But there are a few times where I'm like, no. No, you
that's
can't.
Pushing the limit. Yeah.
That is not, I'm not allowing that. No.
And it is a push and shove game because as players, we want to make something cool, especially more experienced players. We kind of want to do something different. And that usually means trying to break molds and come up with something really cool. And sometimes we just go a little too far with that.
Yeah. So what are now we've kind of already gone into this, but I wanted to ask what some of the common tips you might give. And again, all of our questions are for chat as well. If you're the storyteller, what are some common tips that you might end up giving to the players in your game when they're working on their backstory?
Yeah, we've certainly covered this in some of the other episodes. Conflict, unresolved conflict specifically. Something that's happened or happening that needs to be addressed at some point, and also vague enough that as a storyteller you can fit it in to the setting and also change the perceived expectation of it when the thing comes up, like getting them to be like, okay, this is what's happening, this is my backstory, and then throwing it at them later down the road in a way that causes conflict.
Yeah, I've kind of already gone over this, so I won't go too deep into it, but I do think a lot of my suggestions tend to be campaign or storyline specific for like this type of story I want to run, or in the case of my current game, campaign specific, since I'm using a pre-existing campaign setting that is Eberron. And I fully appreciate and expect that most of my players have probably not read the Eberron book. In fact, I kind of, to some extent, I prefer that they don't. At least some parts of it. There are some parts that I'm like, I wish y'all would read that. But then then I'm like, but there's a lot of parts I don't want people to read because I don't want you to be like, it's the traditional problem with Dungeons & Dragons, and people have played before and know all the monsters in the monster manual. It's like,
yeah,
I don't want them to know everything. That metagame knowledge comes into play, whether you really want it to or not.
Yeah.
And so usually campaign-specific stuff, as well as, just questions that help to flesh out the backstory and things that really help me planning my story, and finding out, like you said, the unresolved conflicts. What are their goals and motivations?
Yeah.
So that some of those things can get into there. Now, go ahead.
I was going to say, also keep notes of all that stuff as you're making your character. Google Drive is a great thing to use, whether you use that or handwrite it or wherever. Keep notes. That's another tip of all of your character creation stuff, because you'll want to reference it.
Now, I did want to move on to focusing majority of this on developing through the game itself, developing the character story, not in character creation, but specifically through play. And so, one of the things that I sometimes worry about is changing certain things about someone's character as storyteller. I mean, as storyteller, you are God. You have the power to do anything and everything. But, sometimes I do worry about changing things that might change someone's character too much in a way that they don't like. Such as, if if someone has a promiscuous character, them finding out later on that they now have a kid, is that crossing the line, or is that acceptable? How well do you know the person, and whether or not they're going to be okay with that? So are there any things that are off limits for you that you wouldn't introduce or wouldn't want a storyteller adding in for your characters specifically?
That's a tough question. I, I pretty much have confidence in our group, at least the people who DM, and when we come up with meaningful stories as players, I have confidence in you and the people running it to represent that well. So I've never been on the receiving end where something like that has actually happened. Um, and I don't know if, just because I'm the one DMing, I don't know if I've done that to anyone else.
Not that I know of.
I would say
there are a lot of things I worry about that aren't necessarily things that maybe everyone gets concerned about or should be. But
I don't honestly have like a legitimate answer for that. It's a tough question.
yeah, I can say, if it helps. For me, there isn't really a limit or things that I would be completely opposed to a storyteller changing or getting into, unless it's something really obviously inappropriate,
Yeah.
There's not really anything that I could think of, because obviously I wrote the question, so I thought about it for a bit, and I was like, I think I would be fine with, if the storyteller took my surviving family members and killed one of them. That's fair game. I mean, that's traditional almost. If you've got surviving family, something's got to happen to them. This is D&D.
Right.
It's almost a given. But there's, that would be fine. I mean, consequences are consequences. So
yeah.
But not everyone agrees in the same way. Like, there are people who are not terribly okay with their character dying. Whereas I'm like, oh, well, I mean, I'm going to be upset, but not at the DM because my character died. I'll be like, well, I'm really upset. But that's how the dice roll.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, on that line, as far as killing off like family members, I think it's okay as long as you kind of build up to it, rather than, oh, I have these family members, and then suddenly like just brand new information. Oh, by the way, one of your family members is now dead. Like, kind of go into it, because that'll establish at least more
It has story purpose,
tension.
impact.
Yeah.
It's not just I killed one of your family members. It's not like a frivolous sort of thing. But actually, I can agree with that. It needs to have a purpose.
Right.
If it's there to drive something, or especially if it could have been prevented in some fashion by your character, that makes it all the better.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a situation where like your character couldn't prevent it because they weren't there, but they could theoretically have maybe been there, so they could have prevented it. That's still fair. It's like, well, I mean, you weren't there for your family, so they're dead.
Yeah. Very case in point, slightly away from the family. And this will come to news, at least for you and for Sarah, who's in chat, and it's relevant. You guys this last week had a situation where there were some elements to her character's backstory that showed up. NPCs that ultimately you found dead, and there was totally legitimately a chance that was not going to happen, and your guys' choices in the combat scenario dictated that.
Yeah, I think we all kind of assumed that once we found them. We were like, yeah, they probably were not dead when we got here, but they're dead now.
Yeah, so I never intended to just be like, oh, they're dead. But things happened, and that's the way it went.
Leverage.
So, yeah.
Let's see. As DMs, have you ever had the worry that you're pushing your players to act one way versus another, or choose one path for? Oh, always, constantly. That's one reason why, like, I'll frequently be like, hey, just because I give you an option doesn't mean you have to take it. And often in different quest hubs and stuff, I'll present lots of different quests and
Yeah.
options to come up, and I want to make quests and things available, especially in like D&D. Now, if you never want to do anything, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That'll make me that'll irk me and make me mad because I'm like, well, you don't want to do anything. What the crap? I keep giving you things, you don't want to do any of them. That's problematic. But if you're like, you skip something or I'm not doing that, that's fine. And I do worry over that. I've read over that, and I'm like, I'm not trying to push you into having to do things.
Yeah, I would say I'm in the same boat. I don't want to push you guys in any particular direction. I don't quite do like the quest hub. Sometimes we'll do that with the guild elements. There'll be a few quests you can take, and that'll dictate some things. But I'll just layer in more of the major story and minor story elements on top of each other, allowing you 2 or 3 technical options.
Yeah.
Usually follow like one main one, but there are other things that you guys could be doing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like in my game currently, the number of options will definitely decrease over time as you get more into the story. Like currently, y'all aren't really embedded in any one story plot, so everything's like, well, what do you want to do?
Yeah, we're kind of fresh out of the starting situation, and now kind of choosing the path.
Yeah. So you're kind of like right now navigating to figure out what the main story that you're going to pursue is going to be, and then some of these other things will fall off the way. They might come back, but who knows? But I do very much kind of worry about that. Like I don't want to, with both character creation and playing through the game, I don't want to force people to do something. Like if I want to make something happen, it'll happen. If I want you to do a certain story or something, you're not going to have a choice about it. Like it's going to be like in your face, and it's going to happen. Obviously I haven't done that very often because I haven't done it with much of anything yet, giving you lots of options. But if and when I want something to be like, and it's going to happen, I'm not going to be like, oh, do you want to do it? And then you say no, and then I make it happen anyway, because that's the worst thing you can do as a storyteller. It's just going to be like, oh, they charge in and draw swords on you, and now you have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, at least on the individual level, like if that's kind of more what the question is referring to, I don't feel like I'm ever pushing any of the players individually to act a certain way. I'm certainly presenting them with things to challenge them or to make them think. But I'm always asking questions like, how do you perceive this event? What is your character? How does your character feel about this or that? And
yeah, for character behavior, the only time I'd say I wouldn't worry about affecting someone's character behavior. The only time I get into that neighborhood is if I feel like someone is behaving inappropriately. And I don't necessarily mean like explicit or something. And we've had a conversation about alignment. I don't necessarily think that's a good guide for how someone should be behaving. I mean more like in terms of like metagaming or something. If they're pulling in metagame knowledge too much or something, then I want to then I do want to step in and be like, your character is doing things that don't make sense. But generally, no. That's actually something I don't worry too much about. Is kind of pushing someone too much in one direction for character behavior wise. Though I will say I do a little bit when it comes to terms of like the quests and stuff. Like that joke comes up occasionally in my game. Like Tarask or somebody else say something like
that joke.
Like, like we're skipping this quest. Oh, the DM's gonna be mad. We're skipping this. This is obviously a plot hook, and we're skipping it. And I'm like, no, I mean,
he introduced a wasp spray NPC, and now there's wasps flying around. This is important. We have to do this. Like, everyone, let's go. No, I don't want to.
My favorite thing about that was it wasn't important. It was like the epitome of a really stupid side quest that y'all were like, we're not doing that, and you left, and then it came up again later, and for one person, and that one person was like, I'm gonna do it, and they did it on their own, and they're like, what happened? And it's like, nothing. It's just you killed some wasps. I mean, what'd you expect to happen?
Yeah.
They were like, really? It's just okay. I'm like, yeah, it's wasps. What? wasp spray doesn't even work. It's
Some
trash.
players have to eat all the bacon. All of it.
Let's see. Where was I? I kind of got lost on my questions and stuff here.
We just finished her question.
Yeah. What are some big ways as storyteller to provide character development opportunities during this actual gameplay?
Big ways.
We covered one, which is
right.
Death of
Conflict.
touchstones and
Yeah.
relatives and such, or other negative things from those.
Yeah, I like to take the approach of, there's some major elements to each character, and there are some minor elements to each character. I have plans for the major portions, but I like to continually, as the campaign goes on, even if we're focusing a major portion on one person, to throw in some minor elements from everyone else to provide elements, at least, that they can resonate with and feel like there's something that they can react to. Even if it's a minor thing, just the inclusion of an NPC. For instance, this goes a while back. At this point, a while back, one of our characters was nearly assassinated, kind of starting up the process of getting to his main elements, and then happened to be nearly assassinated by an NPC who your character was familiar with, including elements of your own kind of minor storytelling, sort of. And just like really representing those elements continually, I think. Not always, not every session, but constantly bringing something in that can resonate with a player.
Yeah. Kind of touching back to the idea of touchstones, relatives and friends and stuff of your characters who can have things happen to them. I think a version of that's can be compelling besides just them dying or being kidnapped or yada yada yada, the traditional stuff, is having something occur that has them change from the player's expectations. So, the player and their character expect them to behave a certain way, but oftentimes we're playing characters that go on adventures for long periods of time. They're off. And then your little sister, by the time you get back, is not such an innocent little sister anymore. I think some things like that can happen to show growth on people around them and people that they may be closely tied to and have perceptions of, and then you kind of mess with those, and they're like, oh God, now they have to come to terms with them. Showing the passage of time outside of that character.
Yes.
The passage of time of the environment or other characters around them as kind of a cue that, yeah, other things are changing, you should be changing as well.
A static world beyond the group. It's dynamic.
Yeah. Another thing that's always like loss is always a good motivator, of course. And outside of just people is taking away something that they value, whether it's material or otherwise, but actually impacting or taking away something that they value besides just people.
Like a wand.
Yeah. I kind of need that. It's important. I can't cast spells without it.
That's also true. But
I mean, I can, but not very effective.
Yeah.
I actually was thinking my favorite thing for this is to not incur loss. I mean, you're going to do that eventually in some way. It's going to come up in a story. But I think one of my favorite ways to try and change, or not change, but promote character development, give people opportunities to change or to grow, is to present moral conflict in their goals. If somebody wants to do X, and that thing may be fine in and of itself, but then adding a moral conflict to it that makes it more complicated than it originally was, because then they have to choose. Is there some other way to do their goal? Is their goal worth the cost? They have to really start weighing that and going like, oh, what am I willing to pay to do this? And you don't want it, I don't think you want it to be so high that it makes the choice obvious for them and like, oh, I can't do this because the cost is just way too high. But I think ideally you want it to toe that line to where it's not obvious either way that they either will or won't do it. They're just like, oh,
Right.
they have to really struggle over it some.
Yeah. You yourself, your character Rohan, got into just through the main part of the other character's, main story element in a situation where you felt obligated to probably kill every single person you came across who recognized you or who knew where you were, and that became an issue. You were mad at an NPC. I turned around and had the NPC kind of remind you in a few instances of that goal, causing you to potentially kill someone by lighting them on fire.
I did
And
cover them in oil.
you did. You did not light them on fire, but yeah, you prepared it. But like just constantly bringing that up, like you wanted to kill people, and that wasn't normal for your character. That was never verbally, at least, expressed up until that point. Like that was something you were quite capable of being willing to do.
Yeah, I mean, because he was very much looking at it like he doesn't want to kill people that don't necessarily explicitly deserve it, but they went into like that town, and he's like, and he even had a conversation with one of the other characters. He's like, who's involved in this, and if they find out that we're responsible for what we're doing right now, they are going to hunt us down. They're going to kill us. They will probably kill everyone else we know. So anyone who finds out about us has to die. And so they ended up not doing that and not killing everyone that they've seen and run into along the way, in part because it kind of finally became apparent that those people are going to find out either way. And so he's definitely not going to kill people just to slow it down by like maybe a week. That's not going to do anything. So
there was, at least for a time, a little bit of player and player interaction on deciding how to follow that path.
Who dies and who doesn't die.
Yeah.
Let's see. Sarah thought of another question. How would you handle a situation in which one of your players wanted to kill off their character or play a different character? I mean, first I would allow it. I would say in terms of killing off their character, it would depend on the situation and if I thought it fit for the story. I wouldn't necessarily just 100% be like, oh, you want to kill off your character? Great, let's kill off your character. I might. And I would say I would be inclined to, if that's their desire for their character. I'd be inclined to, because, I mean, that's just good drama all the time. You can always find a way to kill a character, and it impacts the rest of the party. But it would depend on whether or not I could fit it into the story. I wouldn't necessarily just...
It would be hard. You might have to force it in a situation. I would at least also kind of have a talk out of the games, like, are you wanting to do this because you're just not having fun? Is it something that you created about your character that is now just not working, that you're trying to avoid it and make something a little more enjoyable? In which case, definitely going to try to work that out and make that character dead.
Yeah, I think both that and what Grimslag said, makes sense. Talking to the person and making sure, that they really want to kill off their character or make a new character. And there can be some cases where they just want to break from their character, especially in a really long-running game. They may want to just do something else for a while, and that could certainly be an option to be like, okay, maybe we retire this character for a couple months, and then we come back to it. Just take a break and do something else.
Yeah. Go on a sabbatical and travel the world.
I certainly wouldn't kill their character like right off the bat. Grimslag, like, oh, you want to kill your character? Great, let's just shank him. That would be a conversation to be had in between sessions and for a while. Like, how do you want to do this? Why are you wanting to kill them off? What are we doing? Yeah. Just make the character dead. Bam! Problem solved. So what are some smaller things that you can do to provide character development opportunities?
Continual questions. Not every week, not every session, but major points, major elements when you're noticing either a confrontation in the group or you're starting to deal with some things that there's some hedging on that you might notice. Ask your players the in-character questions of, how does your character feel about this thing happening? get them to think about them, get them to really start to process it, because sometimes they'll play a game, it'll be lots of excitement, maybe you die, maybe you almost die, and then you have a break for 6 days and you're not thinking about it, and you come back and you're like, oh, that's right, I almost died. Oh, now we're playing, and you're just getting back into it, and get them to actually think about those potential changes that could be incurred in your character.
Yeah, facing death was one of the ones I thought of, because I think that's something that everyone should think of on their own as well. Like, oh, my character just almost died. Like that's that's not something you just walk away from and go like, ah, whatever, my character almost died. I mean, that should bother you. And that is something that I would say actually most people like playing games, especially like Dungeons and Dragons, don't think of that much. Like, oh, my character almost died, whatever, and they walk it off. And it's like, I mean, your character almost died. In some cases, your character did die. And you're just like, I'm fine. I just still walk around the block a bit and take a nap. I'm good. And it's like, yeah, maybe that should bother your character a little bit more.
Yeah. My character almost died in your campaign. I just one roll. I had one good roll, and if it had been bad, that'd be it. So I made a choice. Like, how am I going to represent that kind of situation again? And it's going to be probably the reverse of how I was doing it. Instead of going blindly in, I'm gonna hang back, guys. You got this. You got this.
Maybe 10-foot reach is a good thing to have.
Yeah.
Just maybe. Yeah, once in a while doing, as Grimslike said, kind of when someone can't make it or something, doing smaller, intimate side quest sessions. That's something I haven't given too much thought to. I do have a tendency sometimes to cancel things because it can be difficult sometimes. Just throw in a random thing in the middle of something that's happening because somebody can't make it. But I do agree, like having a small session with like 2 people or something could be good to help bond those characters. Give them a chance to know more about each other or something.
There's often, I think, a point in any campaign where, at least ones with more travel time, more narrative description elements, where a lot of potential conversation just doesn't happen because we're trying to get through things. And if you and those people are certainly available to do it and they're interested, having a 1 hour, 2 hour little, conversation element can certainly be cool and helpful.
Yeah, that's why I like, even during travel and stuff, I always try to encourage people to do things and have conversations and stuff. Obviously, you don't want to do it too much. Like, you don't want to eat up tons of time doing it like all the time. But I always try, even when we're doing like travel and stuff, I always try to be like, okay, or like people are going to sleep or whatever. I'm like, is anyone doing anything else tonight? Anyone do anything now that you're in camp? Because that's a good time to be like, I want to talk to this person. I want to go do that. And kind of fit some of that stuff in there. I do kind of like the idea of having almost like a side session where people can have like a one-on-one conversation or like a small group conversation. Like, all right, we're ending at the campsite, so you can all have a downtime talk. You can talk to each other in downtime if you want to. The problem is we always have like 1 or 2 people who never check the messages and reply.
No. Yeah, especially when it's just a chat based, like Discord chat or something. It's a lot harder.
There's like 2 or 3 of us that would just get on there and reply, but then no one else. There's always like a couple people that just don't. And it's like,
yeah. I will only usually try to have a sub session, if you will, or pre-session with someone if I feel that what they're about to get involved in is going to eat like an hour's worth of time suddenly at the beginning of the next session. I've only really had to do that once, and he almost died, but but I'm glad I did it, because it was like, this could be 15 minutes or this could be like 2 hours, and it ended up being closer to 2 hours.
Yeah. Anytime someone's doing something solo or like only
it's
a
hard.
small part of the group, it's a nightmare if the whole group's there, because it's just like everyone else is like, it's like the issue with like rogues and scouting. If they're always like on their own wanting to search like a whole room in advance and stuff, you're like, yep, the whole rest of the party's getting pissed off because we're just sitting here like.
and that's not entirely disconnected from storytelling, because as a rogue, if that's built into your character, like I'm an explorer or that's my job, and you're personifying that as your character, and you're not getting to do that because of that issue, like for rogues at least, or rogue type classes in other settings, how do you address that?
Yeah. Well, I think it comes into finding the proper balance of how often to do it, and how much time to spend on it. And I think you see a really good evolution of that in like Critical Role Campaign 1 with Vax. In the beginning,
Yes.
he was like annoying about it. Like in some of the beginning parts,
Let
he
me
did
do
it
my
so
thing.
much that it felt like people were just like, we want to do stuff too.
Oh yeah. Oh, they were
But
getting
then
to the
later
point where they
on,
just started following him.
yeah, they just start
Like,
marching in behind him.
that's it. We're just going in.
But then later on, they were like much more balanced approach about it. Sometimes they'd let him do it for like a room or two, or really scout ahead, but he didn't do it like all the time. And Scrimslag said, last time the solo session thing happened at a tavern I owned, and we spent the session hiring locals to put up an expansion and dealing with local union extortionists and beer supply problems. That's pretty funny.
I mean, that could be fun. That could be quite fun. It has elements of it there.
Yeah, we could have a solo mission work on our guild hall. I mean, that's a thing.
Yeah.
I already got a tub. Now I have to get a new tub for it because the other one burned down.
Part of loss. You guys lost the guild hall. Technically in retribution for acts that someone else in your party had done pre-campaign, but part of loss. Not a human, not a person, but a sense of responsibility.
Yeah. Let's see. What was I looking at here? Smaller ways to provide character development opportunities. Kind of back on track a little bit. One of the things that I have is exploring things that may actually be more important than their personal interests. I think it's very important for characters to have personal goals and things that they strive for, and that's also important for developing their characters. But much like adding a moral problem to their personal goals, I think also having another world event or another thing happen that's so important that even though they want to pursue their personal goals, they can't ignore it. It's kind of on that same level of it adds complexity, because then they have to go like, okay, do I go after the thing I want to do, or do I have to deal with this, and how do I act about that?
Yeah.
And I do think there's a balance there, because you don't want to do it so much that they can't go after their personal goals. But it's almost like the purpose. That's almost like how game stories evolve, is making things happen that make them put off their personal goals a lot of the times until a later point. Because
certainly depending on what the goal might be. Yeah, absolutely. I know how that feels like. So many goals, so little time, always something else in the way.
Yeah. The last thing I had was kind of goes back to the moral decisions. I really like to weigh in moral issues and conflicts a lot in different things. And one thing that I think can be fun to pull up is the trolley problem, which are moral decisions that don't really have a good option. The trolley problem is the basic thing where, okay, there's a train coming one way and it's going to run over 5 people. You can pull a lever and it'll run over 1 person instead. There's not really a good option either way. And which one is the right choice? Well, that really depends on your viewpoint. Whether
you take the Vulcan approach or not.
Yeah, do you kill the 1 person because that's better for the mini, or do you say, well, it's not my problem and let it kill 5 people? I'm having no role in this. Don't put me in this. And so not necessarily following that exact philosophy, but introducing no-win situations, like situations where no matter what you do, it's going to suck, but you get to pick the special kind of hell you're walking into.
Yeah. You could just reprogram the train, but...
That's cheating.
That is cheating.
Don't Mashimaru this.
I think that's a really great way to go about it, because you're, no matter what, assuming your players are thinking about it, you're giving them a moment of, I'm responsible for that no matter what happens, and it's a conflicting element, period, and they have to kind of come to terms with that.
Yeah. For instance, you mentioned earlier that in your game we walked into a thing, and ended up getting some people related to one of the other characters killed because of how we handled that. Now, I'm assuming that if we had decided to talk and perhaps save them, we probably would not have liked how that outcome came about, or what the other option was going to be. So it's kind of a similar sort of thing. Like, we either get to talk to them, and we're probably going to let them off the hook, even though we really want to kill them, but then we would save some other people, or we did what we did, which was kick in the door and start shooting people.
Yeah.
But then some old people died.
Yeah. And I gave you a secondary option mid-fight as well going into that. It's like, you're kicking in the door. Okay, this is how this is happening. The main person there was sitting in the back, is like, okay, throwing out some social responses, seeing if anyone would bite to them. No one did. It's like, okay, we're going this way. The train has left the station.
My character was hands off. My character was like, this is not my backstory. I'm doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
You want me to fireball them? I will fireball all of them.
Except you didn't have it prepared.
I did not have it prepared. The one time it would have been really useful. I was like, ah!
Yeah.
Let's see. So, my last real question specifically, my last big question anyway, is what about shorter term games? Now, a lot of these things really work out and apply when you're running kind of a longer game. But what about shorter term games? What can a storyteller do when you may only have a handful, or maybe like a dozen sessions at most?
Yeah, super hard, especially usually because going into it as the storyteller, you already have an idea of what you want to run. My only thing that I could think of for me doing is have a loose idea of what I would run, get everyone's kind of rough backstory, make sure I give them enough information that it can all kind of coalesce nicely, and then rework my entire story thematically to fit as many of those elements as possible in as short as time as possible, so that they're all getting a little bit of their thing.
Yeah, I think for me, if I'm running a shorter game, if I'm running a game that's not very long, it's probably not going to be based on the character stories. I do still kind of want the characters to have stories, and I would work in some bits here and there if I can, but it's probably going to be its own self-contained story for the most part, perhaps with some influences from their characters. And instead, what I'm going to do is be quick and direct, target specific characters with certain things and certain elements and certain challenges that are kind of tailored for them to challenge them in certain ways. Like, if I know they have a certain goal or a certain backstory element, I'm going to feature that into the story in some way to make it challenging for them, to make it a problem for them, especially something that would challenge what I perceive as their character's values. If they've set up their character and like, my character is a grizzled soldier veteran who would never leave any of his comrades behind and stuff, then maybe there's something I can do with that to make them have to challenge that, to either defy that or to make them have to fight really hard to go after that, so that they can have either some character growth or a way to show what their character is, even if it's not necessarily changing. To show that. And I think also adding moral quandaries, I've mentioned that a lot, but I think that this is a place where it can be very useful because you have a shorter amount of time to do things with them. And their moral quandaries are always easy to put in because they don't have to be tied to someone's backstory. You could just throw them out there and put them into a situation where they're like, I got to do this, or I got to do this, I don't know. And then it lets them either change or reveal their character by choosing what they're going to do. Or if they're okay with what the group does, because that the group may decide to do something they're not okay with.
Right.
And then do they allow it, or do they suffer for it? I mean,
you could, on top of that, also going into it before you even start, see how many people, if any of them, want to have connected backstories, so that you can have more of a one big element that applies to every single person, or even a smaller group of the group, so that you don't have to do so much stretching between all the different things going on.
Yeah.
And we, somewhat relevant, we as a group did an interesting thing a while back where we had about 4 sessions of a story where each of us DM'd And we sat down together. It's like, how are we all connected? It's got to be that to make this easy. There were some parameters we put in place to make sure that it kind of made sense, and that could be helpful for a DM with a group setting that's not quite the same.
Yeah.
But to have some shared parameters that everyone agrees on.
Yeah, and that game was pretty fun. I mean, we had basically family members, and we decided this is what happened to them. They get like abducted by this rival noble family, and then then we basically just went, okay, you're going to DM, then you're going to DM, then you're going to DM, then you're going to DM, and we just cycled through. Every person just took up where the last one went off and built up a quick story and some stuff, and it was pretty fun. It was interesting. It was a very different way to go about a lot of this. And thank you, Moobot, for reminding me to plug all my own stuff in the middle of the show. Because Friday, I am going to play Deep Rock Galactic stream. I usually do VR streams on Friday, but I'm in the middle of moving, so all my stuff is boxed and packed up. So I'm probably going to play Deep Rock Galactic on Friday for a while. I have Star Citizens streams on Sundays at 1 p.m., but I will have all my stuff packed up Sunday, so I probably won't do that this weekend. But anyway, moving right along from that quick Moobot reminder, it just showed up in chat. I did have one more question, but before I went into it, I want to see if there was anything you specifically wanted to talk about.
Oh, man. I think you covered a lot of the main points. In storytelling, a lot of it is about taking the information you have, trying to work it into a bigger story if you have one, narratively speaking, but also adjusting and allowing the players to come up with elements that become bigger parts of the story, and to be okay to allow that flow of information that they're giving, maybe on the spot even, that maybe you didn't plan or you remember differently, and just kind of allowing it to kind of transition into something they've now created that you're just going with. It can certainly help create at least on the player and the DM connection level, like a shared experience.
Yeah, I think having regular communication between the storyteller and the players, having the storyteller not just help create a character and then drop off, but still check in with people occasionally about certain things. Not necessarily frequently, not necessarily like every session, but just, keeping in touch occasionally and going like, I noticed this, or asking about things, and just having ongoing conversations about some stuff that may come up. And having the players feel comfortable going to the storyteller and saying like, I was thinking of this, or even I would like this to happen. Like, I would like this to be a thing for my character. Is that something we could do? I tend to generally think that's best at character creation, when you can really work it into like the world. But even having something come up, later on, like with your game at present, at one point, we were traveling on the seas, and I was like, this is why, I had my character start doing something, and I came to you and I was like, this is why, like, this is what he's working on. Like, I see him being very considerate and thoughtful of other people, and he's thinking about how to make them more comfortable and welcome. Somebody seems to be having an issue, and he is like, let's see if we can mollify that a little bit, I
mean, it helps when you don't fireball them, so.
Well, we're not always in control of such things.
No. But no, it's a great thing to point out. And I did the same, I think even just this last week prior to your session, I came to you, said, and more out of I didn't want to blindside you with what I was about to be doing. Just like, I think this is kind of a transition goal that's going to be taking place. And you gave just a really quick, rough thought on that, with the personality split thing.
Yeah, so. This just, for some reason, made me think of something else that would actually be an interesting future topic, I think. What we view as our weak points as storytellers.
Yes.
A discussion of like, what do you think you're not good at, or need to be better at? Because Somebody was commenting on this on Discord the other day, and I was like, "Oh, absolutely! I am fully convinced that every tabletop storyteller just thinks they're awful. Just constant self doubt, just like about everything." Um,
Got to get the reinforcement.
yeah, and so anyway, the other question I had was kind of based on a post that I saw on Twitter by Critical Bard, who I follow on Twitter.
I know who that is.
Was talking about making a character with no backstory, like someone who wasn't a hero, who was just a commoner, and they wanted to play it and didn't have a class, like wasn't like a level 1 fighter or even like a level 0 half fighter or something. It was just like a nobody, totally. And I was like, how would you work with someone like that who has no backstory, really, except that I grew up on the farm and or something, they're not a hero. They don't have any notable abilities. How would you work with them?
Like they don't even want to start at level, like assuming you're starting at level 1, they don't even want to be like, I'm a level 1 fighter. I want to be literally a level half commoner,
no proficiencies,
who now is experiencing everything as we go.
Yeah.
I would say, okay, we can try that. Where do you want to go? Like what? And we've talked about this with Critical Role. Matt Mercer asks his players, what type of story do you want? And at that point, it really does become your story for the character. But you should at least get some input on what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with. Maybe get a list of classes. Like if you had to at some point pick a class, and you will, what do you want to be? Caster? Do you want to be this? And really they're trusting you with all of it. And you do have to at least be aware that you have a bigger story going on, and playing a character, or at least coming up with a full story for a character, could kind of, you have to be careful not to over emphasize those elements in your story so that character gets more screen time or something. There's a balance there for sure.
Jojo, the assistant stable boy, was knocked over by a runaway manure cart and wanted to become an adventurer. Well, I like to think of it as, it almost reminds me of like the folk hero backstory for D&D, except it would be before you become the folk hero. It's like someone who decided before ever being a hero or anything that they wanted to be an adventurer, or they were going to go out and adventure, but they haven't had that moment of being like a folk hero or whatever it is yet. They're just not anything yet, really. And I think for me, I think the first step to working with them is just to work with them, to be like, okay, what do you want? Like you said, what kind of story do you want? And then taking it step by step, especially in this case where they're kind of blank slated and they want to, they really don't want to get like slammed into a class. They don't want to get pushed into like being a fighter. They just want the character to grow organically and learn things as they interact with stuff. And it's like, okay, take it step by step. It's challenging, but I think you can focus on their current goals. Like one, what kind of story do you want? But then, okay, well, what are your current goals? Like your character obviously has a current goal. They want to go adventure. Why are they going adventure? What are they trying to do? Right. Then you can maybe extrapolate, okay, what might happen because after that. In terms of mechanics and stuff, that's really, I think, where the trouble comes up, is fitting into something, especially something like D&D, where it's like, oh, how do you fit in mechanically?
Especially level progressions, they happen quickly early on. If you're playing the level system, like you're kind of jumping into that, needing to make a choice very early on.
Potentially, yeah. And kind of what I had suggested to them was, because I commented to them and I was like, maybe you could have a storyteller that comes up with a way for you to learn different things by interacting with them and by doing them and so on and so forth. They could maybe slow down the first couple levels progression some, or maybe be willing to do some smaller sessions in between other sessions to kind of play with stuff, or add some downtime at least between sessions so that the first couple aren't like day 1, day 2, day 3, but instead having some downtime between some of those
Right.
sessions. And also just allow you to pick up things without having to be in a class, like, because those might be the objectives. Maybe the character's like, I want to learn how to fight with a longsword, and they, through using it and training with somebody and stuff, they gain proficiency with a longsword.
Yeah.
And you'd have to have certain limitations to it, like, because you don't want them to end up being like crazy amalgamation of super powerfulness. But finding ways to kind of mix that in there, like, okay, they decided they wanted to experiment with this type of spell casting or something, yada yada yada, or maybe they met some kind of a fiend and made a pact with them for power. What is that going to look like? How are we going to incorporate that into their character? I think there are ways to do it without.
To do.
It would be, yeah, it would be, because it's a very weird request.
Like, how do you handle stats? Like, the min-maxing, or the fact that some stats are just naturally associated with certain classes. And
I definitely don't think that D&D is the ideal
yeah, no.
game for it, but I think it's doable. As long as the question is, I think it's doable as long as the DM is interested in doing it and has the time, because it is something that would be very time intensive for the DM. It is not something that the storyteller is just going to be able to, like, oh, sure, yeah, you've got spells now.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, you can write, you're now proficient with riding a horse. That's fine. The storyteller would really have to be involved in not only helping to provide opportunities for this stuff to happen, but then also involved in figuring out the mechanics and the logistics of how this happens and how it makes sense and how it works without making you like crazy powerful or super underpowered to where you're useless to the team.
It seems very difficult. I wouldn't want to try it anytime soon. It might be a fun experiment if everyone in the party was doing it. And that way there's a little more of the understanding, like, no matter what I do, like, I'm just doing this for everyone. It's easier to kind of balance things, because the same thing could apply to a few different people, and you don't have to pre-prep or over-prep multiple stages for multiple people.
In old school, back in the day, like 2nd and 3rd edition, I did play like one game once where we started off at level 1/2. You basically had like half the proficiencies of your class, and you were halfway, like basically half a commoner, and just started there into a game and a campaign and doing some of that stuff. Sarah has another question here. How would you handle a player wanting to gain proficiency in a skill they don't start with? I'm fine with that, honestly.
As am I. I have a good example of it as well.
It could maybe depend a little bit. Like, there could maybe be something that I would consider to be overpowered or out of scope, or because I am reluctant to let someone just completely have a way to replicate something that is like a class feature for someone else, because that's kind of problematic. Right. There's a feat that does that for a reason, that kind of thing. But in general, I'm fine with it. If somebody wants to spend time, and they actually do, that would be my thing. This isn't like oh yeah, every night I do that, lol. No, you've got to be using it in the game. You've got to be investing time and resources into this. But if you are, then sure. I mean, learn a language.
Both, and this will affect Rohan going into the future as well. It's already affected Torin, our characters from Saturday in my campaign. Torin, the halfling, now owns a boat, is now captain of said boat, but prior to owning the boat, didn't have proficiency in water vehicles, but actually rolled several times to learn things about how they were doing things on the boats the times you were on them prior. And so I allowed that going through. It's like, yeah, you've actually dedicated roles, failures and successes, and into learning this stuff. And so now that you reach this level and have the opportunity to gain that, I will give it to you. And same with the same with Rohan. Continued use of the lockpick going forward could theoretically lead to a proficiency in it.
He probably needs to sit down with Tali and be like, "Can you teach me how to pick locks
Yeah,
better? Because I'm not good at it."
but that's a great way too, is like having multiple characters, one character mentoring another character into kind of picking up proficiency, provided the DM was okay with it, as a good interaction and story for them.
Yeah, and I think some of that, at least for me, is in part because I've played a lot of other tabletop games, and my D&D is not necessarily my favorite tabletop game. In fact, Vampire is, and in Vampire, it's a lot more freeform in the types of things you can have and learn to do. You can put points in anything as long as you learn to do it. You just spend some experience points to learn a new skill. It doesn't matter where it came from or who it was, as long as you had a source for it, including new powers. You can learn new, vampire powers from a completely different vampire clan, and you don't necessarily, you can mix and match a lot of stuff. So I'm very much open to that. And I don't know. I'm sure there are certainly DMs that were like, no, you can't do that, and there are certain things that I could see, like, okay, that might be a problem. But especially when it comes down to skills or things, I don't generally think it's an issue, especially if we're only talking about something that might happen like once. If somebody's like, oh, I spent this time to learn how to do this, and now I want to spend time to learn how to do this, and then I want to spend time to learn how to do. Okay, no, this is getting crazy.
It's got to be something that's sensible, something definitely of interest. Like in our case, Torin the halfling really wanted a boat, and he figured he'd probably be getting one, whether it was given to you guys or he bought one. He was leaning towards that direction, so it made sense. In the case of like a vampire setting, it really has to make sense to be able to pick up a discipline from one of the other clans, because they're so controlling of who learns that.
Yeah.
It's got to make sense, and you can't just allow anything just because.
The storyteller has to be involved with figuring out how you're going to get access to that. And there's usually a cost of some sort. Grimslag had an argument with my GM in Gamma World when I was proficient with a handgun. He insisted that I didn't understand how a rifle worked. The weak written rules were on his side, but come on. I mean, I guess the question is what you mean by how it worked. Like, are you able, if you're talking about just shooting a rifle with proficiency, I would say that those are perhaps different skills, to be able to shoot a pistol versus shoot a rifle. If you're talking about the actual mechanics of how it works, that's a very different thing. I'm not familiar with Gamma World. I would say that I am more reluctant to approve something if the mechanics specifically don't allow it. If the mechanic, because there are things where they put something in there to balance it for a specific reason. Now, I don't necessarily think that game balance is sacrosanct, and that you should always try to encourage things to be completely balanced. But but there's a give and take there, because as the storyteller, you're also responsible for making sure the game stays balanced and other people's classes are playable and stuff. And so if you allow things that can be game breaking, it's problematic for other people. Because like if I'm playing a wizard, but suddenly someone else has got caster features that are way better than all of mine, I'm going to be kind of bitter about it.
Yeah. In the case with guns, though, it kind of makes me think of, I don't think you've seen it, or Sarah, of like Quigley Down Under. There's a famous line from that goes along something like, I said I didn't like to use them. I never said I didn't know how. Something like that. It's like they're relatively related guns, whether it's a pistol versus a longer barrel rifle, relatively related. So there's some crossover. I could be like, you know what? The rules in this case maybe don't make sense.
Yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to understand what it was. I mean, it's still a firearm. They're different types of firearms. I can understand like someone being like, well, you have a proficiency bonus with a pistol. That doesn't mean you have a proficiency bonus with a rifle. I could see an argument there, I guess, depending on the system. But being like, you don't know what the rifle is, that seems weird. That seems odd.
You pull the trigger, you aim, you breathe, you
Yeah, it very much is the case that, storytellers need to be able to interpret rules or discard them sometimes when they decide, the hell with it, I don't like it. So we are pretty much at time. We're actually over a little bit. We try to keep this down to about right at an hour. So we're a little
That's
bit
all right.
over. Our next topic next week is going to be dealing with metagaming.
2 weeks.
Oh, sorry. Not next week, but week after next week. We do this every other Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be dealing with metagaming as the storyteller, how to cope with and address that. What's allowable, what's not allowable, so on and so forth. That's going to be our topic in 2 weeks. Until then, remember, if it's a moving box, it's probably not a mimic.